Back in January, when asked if President Obama would end the policy of don't ask, don't tell for gays in the military, White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs said just one word: yes. But as to when that might happen, well, the administration has seemed less certain.
I think the president and I feel like we've got a lot on our plates right now, and let's push that one down the road a little bit.
As for the opinion of Colin Powell, who advocated the original policy back in 1993 when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, well, Rachel Maddow sat down with him yesterday to see what he thinks about it now.
Do you still think that don't ask, don't tell is necessary for good order and discipline in the military? You've discussed the idea that it should be reviewed. Mm-hmm. Would you support the move if Congress decided to get rid of that policy?
If Congress decided to get rid of the policy, and if the military leaders of the armed forces are part of that, of course I would. And if the president decided to do it, I would support the president. In 1993, when this became an issue, when President Clinton came in, I was never given, nor was Secretary Aspen at that time, ever given an instruction by President Clinton to get rid of the policy. We studied it and came to a conclusion that at that time in 1993, don't ask, don't tell was a pretty good solution for the moment. I didn't want it to happen, but the Congress made it a law. So it is not a policy anymore. It is a law, and only the Congress can change it, as Secretary Gates mentioned last week. But it's 15 years later. A lot has changed. Attitudes have changed. And so I think this is the time to review that policy and to review it before congressional committees to see if a change of law is now appropriate. I am withholding judgment because I am not the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff anymore, and I think we have to hear from our senior military leaders about the effect of a change in the law would have on the force. And if they came forward and said, let's do away with it, or let's modify it or change it, that would mean a lot to me in terms of my point of view. But ultimately, it's going to have to go before the Congress as a law to be changed, not a policy to be changed.
The examples of other countries that have successfully integrated openly gay people into their forces, are those good reference points for that sort of a study?
Those are reference points that have to be taken into account. Sure, I would study every one of those cases. Many of them have happened since 1993 with a number of countries, and I think all of those should be looked at. And I don't think, however, the armed forces of the United States is the same as the armed force of one of our European friends or our Canadian friends. And therefore, as the courts have held traditionally over the years, and the Congress has as well, the military is a unique institution with rules and regulations and a way of living in close proximity of our soldiers, and you're told who you're going to live with. That the military can have a set of regulations and rules that would not pass any kind of legal or constitutional muster if it was in civilian society. And so I think because it is the quality of the force and the ability of the force to apply the nation's power wherever it's called upon to do so, we have to be careful when we change this policy. But if the military leaders think that enough time has passed since 1993 that we ought to take a look at this and perhaps change the policy, I'll be completely supportive. But I'm not going to make a judgment until I hear from the chiefs.
General Colin Powell, not alone, though, among military men in thinking that the policy should be reevaluated. Our next guest thinks it should just be thrown out. Joining me now is Clifford Alexander, former Secretary of the Army under President Carter and the first African-American to hold that position, and the former chairman of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission under President Johnson. Secretary Alexander, thanks very much for joining us tonight. First of all, why do you believe that repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell is a good idea? Thanks for being with us.
Don't ask, don't tell is a little bit like having a bowl of bigotry surrounded by a curtain of silk. It takes the basic integrity of a person and says, you must forget it. It turns people into liars. Would we ask at this particular point for a Muslim to act like a Jew when he was in the service? Would it ask for a Buddhist to act like a Catholic? It's the same kind of thing. It is in our country that every individual should be judged according to their skills, not their sexual preference, not their race, not their religion. And so this has been an inconsistent, foolish policy. It should have been thrown out a long time ago. It is really something that not only affects the individuals who have to lie day by day as they serve our country and risk their lives, but it does affect their families. It does affect their colleagues in the service, because some of them may know about it and not want to rat on their fellow servicemen and women. And I do think, Andrea, if you look at it this way, when I was Secretary of the Army, I said about women, women in the Army are soldiers in the Army. Gays in the Army are soldiers in the Army. Straights in the Army are soldiers in the Army. They should be judged according to what their MOS is, that is, military occupational skill. For us to pretend that somehow it's going to affect negatively the way our nation and its brave men and women serve is absolute nonsense. We do know, because they've been thrown out.
One of the things...
Go right ahead.
One of the things, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You know, 12,000 service members have lost their jobs since this policy was initiated in 1993. And we do know one small instance, perhaps, but one that I'm aware of, is the Arabic translators. How has the military lost the service of effective people at a time when we need service members because of this policy?
Because it's a bigoted policy, and we've let bigotry overcome good sense. We want to protect this country as best we can, all of its citizens, male and female, gay and straight. It should never be a requirement, and we were wrong to have it many, many years ago, that we would keep people out of the service because they were gay. I do think it is very important to get over this nonsense of let's study it. There's nothing to study here. The question really is, are we believers in the true tenets of democracy that judge people according to their skills, that individual talents is what we need within the service? It might be an Arabic translator, it might be any particular skill. Gays in this country have the same skills as straights in this country. We have grown up, and we've started to realize it more and more, that we have been narrow-minded in the past. Let's not be narrow-minded in the future by delaying this. Now, it's on our elected officials. Let's not put everything in the White House. There are 435 members of the House, and there are 100 members of the Senate, all of whom have responsibilities, I think, to look at this issue. And they could do it very soon. We are able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So it is possible to look at this with some sense of urgency in the interest of democracy, in the interest of fairness, in the interest of the protection of our rights and the rights of all of the citizens of this country.
Let me ask you, though, about a letter. I want to share this with you and get your response. More than 1,000 flag and general officers just wrote a letter to the president, reading in part, and let me quote from it, that our experience as military leaders leads us to have great concern about the impact that repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law would have on morale, discipline, unit cohesion, and overall military readiness. We believe that imposing this burden on our men and women in uniform would undermine recruiting and retention, impact leadership at all levels, and eventually break the all-volunteer force. Let me get you to respond to that.
I think it's nonsense. I do think that people obviously have a right to their opinion, as I do mine. To just come to that conclusion without any evidence, and there is no evidence for this. And if you look around the world, country after country has included all people in their service. Now, we really do have to treat this as a serious issue that faces individuals and individual rights. And we also, to have a policy, the same people who are writing that letter had within their units gays and lesbians, because, as we know, we have this ridiculous policy of don't ask, don't tell. So as long as it was not known what their sexual preference was, they were able to serve and did serve admirably. Well, now let's take those of us who may or may not be straight. Do we ask about what our sexual preference is before we go in and say yes or no on the basis of that? Of course not. So I do think if they want to be like lemmings to the sea, those who would sign a petition like this without evidence are acting without facts.
All right. Clifford Alexander, former Secretary of the Army, by the way, whose daughter Elizabeth, incidentally, composed and recited the inaugural poem on January 20th. Mr. Alexander, Secretary Alexander, thank you very much for your time and your insights tonight.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.